Good evening. Um, uh, Good evening. Good evening. I see there was a bit of a Luxolong Grove, Molo comrade. Sianbulisa up wake up. Basically, the June 16 moment is a highly contested event. The ANC used to claim it, but it has stopped. Now the big contest around who is responsible for June 16 is between the Black Consciousness movement and some people in the PAC. But I see today, as in the past few years, the commemoration of June 16 has been shared between the PAC and AZAPO. But what I want to talk about today is quickly to make a case for who can legitimately claim the June 16 uprising, and also just to clarify the leadership of that moment. We know that the comrades from the PAC support their claim that it was the PAC which was responsible for June 16 by referring to the Betal trial, where the PAC leaders, Fania Mutupeng, and a few other PAC members, incidentally, they were also Black Consciousness members who were part of the the Betal trial, where Mutupeng was eventually sent to 9 years on Robben Island under the accusation that he was responsible for organizing the June 16 uprising. That claim is, however, checked by the fact that also Winnie Mandela was arrested. She was in the cells for 4 to 5 months. And then thereafter, Winnie Mandela was banished to Bramford in the Free State. For a whole 8 years, she was there. So the contestation between the claims made on the basis of what the system was saying gives equal credence to the claims by both the ANC and the PAC, because the PAC leaders of Fania Mutupeng ended up at Robben Island for the claim that he organized the students, in the same way that Winnie Mandela spent 8 years banned in Bramford for the same claim that she was behind the student uprising. Now, to be fair, both Winnie Mandela and Zephania Mutupeng were involved with assisting the students. But these students were organized under a political formation of the Black Consciousness movement, SASM, South African Student Movement in particular, Tsietsi Mashinini and Khotso Siahlolo. And we know that Tsietsi Mashinini is the undisputed leader of the 1976 uprising. He was the spokesperson and the recognized leader, and on that day he played a pivotal role. And Tsietsi Mashinini gave the speeches, and soon thereafter he had to flee the country as a consequence of being sought for leading the student in 1976. He was then succeeded in the role of, remember, the organization that led the student was the Soweto Student Representative Council, which Tsietsi was the chairperson. And when Tsietsi fled the country, Soweto June, his deputy, took over as the chairperson of the Soweto Representative Council. And he organized one of the biggest strikes, which involved the workers. And their slogan was to Elof Street, basically, which was the main street in Soweto, in Johannesburg. Soweto June took over. And Soweto himself was a student and a member of SASM, the Black Consciousness Movement. Now, one of the figures which has not been properly recognized for the June 16 is Abraham Tiro, a friend of Steve Biko, who was a teacher at one of the high schools where Tsietsi Mashinini was a student, and Tsietsi was his student. And he was responsible, Abraham Tiro, for politicizing Abraham Tiro, making sure that the students are organized under the Black Consciousness Movement. So Abraham Tiro plays a very, very critical role. And he was a key leader of the Black Consciousness Movement and a very close friend of Steve Biko. So that actually just cements the claim that we make that the 1976 moment was a moment organized by the Black Consciousness Movement. And then there's one other event which is not spoken about when we talk about June 16, and that is the Sasso trial. Steve Biko provided an expert kind of witness. He was called on the Sasso trial. He was not part of the trialists, but there were 11 Sasso members who were on trial in Pretoria at the time. And in May 1976, the whole of May, Steve Biko is on the stand giving testimony on the Black Consciousness Movement. And one of the things that happened is the media was reporting extensively on Steve Biko's testimony. Not only that, his voice was heard on radio, and that galvanized the whole of the so-called Transvaal at the time. People were listening to this brave black man who's articulate talking about the black question. And that galvanized the students of Soweto and the Transvaal at the time around the Black Consciousness Movement. So we need, when we're factoring in what influenced the events of 1976, to bring in Steve Biko's testimony, because that's powerful testimony. Gave a lot of black people a lot of hope, a lot of courage, and understanding that there was an organization which is standing for black liberation. And the students were therefore inspired by Steve Biko's testimony. I do think that we need to pay much more attention on Steve Biko's testimony and how it assisted to galvanize the moment of 1976, because that testimony remains one of the seminal articulation of the oppression of black people, and gave a lot of courage and hope to a people who were, remember, in 1976, in May, as Biko was giving that testimony, black people had not had any voice. They're coming from the repression and mass murder of the Sharpeville massacre and the burning of political parties. So there was no overt, open political articulation of the aspirations of black people. So Steve Biko on the stand, he uses the apartheid court to articulate the black question and to almost give hope to black people that somebody is speaking on your behalf. There is an organization that is challenging the system, and that gave a lot of confidence to a lot of black people and the students of Soweto, who of course must have been listening very carefully, including the fact that they were organized already under the Black Consciousness organizations. And so I do think that Sasso trial must be brought into the discussion on what brought to the explosion of 1976. Of course, the biggest factor is the imposition of Afrikaans by the apartheid government. A lot of people speaks about that, but that was just the igniting factor. As Soweto June himself says, that we were fighting for the total liberation of our people, because after Tsietsi left the country, Soweto took over, and Soweto has a few public engagement. They issued statements, and in his statements you can see they're not just talking about Africans, but they're talking about the totality of the oppression of black people, including denouncing the homeland system. So the students were put in history as the face of the resistance for the total emancipation of our people. Now, something which I think is interesting also is the relationship between Soweto June and Tsietsi Mashinini. And if you know a bit of Sesotho or Setswana, Soweto means peace, Tsietsi means trouble. And so you have Soweto and Tsietsi as two best friends. And in their character, it's very interesting that Tsietsi was the more robust, and he could fight you right now with his fists. And Soweto was a peaceful, calm one, who was also very intellectual. By the way, Soweto is my political mentor. I lived with him for a year in Soweto Zola when I was doing matric, and he really assisted me to understand also the dynamics of the 76 moment and how the Black consciousness movement was developing. Anyway, so Tsietsi leaves the country, Soweto takes over, Soweto June, and he leads the students further, because there is a big moment after the 76 uprising of student worker solidarity. That is one of the key learning lessons that Soweto spoke about, that students realized that alone they could not sustain the revolution, and that's why they needed black students, black worker solidarity. Another time we can also talk about how the system initially tried to organize workers in the hostels against the students, trying to use the tribal questions and so on. But the students actually engaged the workers in the hostels, showed them why they must come over, and that is what led to the success of the stay away, which was called by Soweto June after Tsietsi Mashinini went to exile. Now, Winnie Mandela is a very interesting character in all that. As I said initially, she was eventually arrested and banished for her role in the June 16 uprising. Now, Soweto June tells the story that Winnie told them that when you leave the country, you mustn't join the ANC, because those people are no longer fighting. Because remember, the ANC has been in exile for a long time, and there was nothing happening in the country coming from the ANC. So Winnie said, don't join the ANC when you go out of the country. You must find ways to continue the struggle. And of course, Soweto June and Tsietsi Mashinini, when they left the country, eventually both of them, there's that picture of Soweto and Tsietsi with their fist raised. That was taken apparently in Swaziland after Soweto had also left, and Tsietsi went to fetch him, took him to Botswana, and eventually they ended up in West Africa. Again, just to show the brilliance of these young people. But remember, Soweto is about 17, 18, Tsietsi 19. These are young people. But they asked for a meeting with Obasanjo, the president at the time, the general of Nigeria. And they went there. He said he's got 30 minutes. Once they start talking, he gave them more than 2 hours. And thereafter, I provided them with diplomatic passports from Nigeria, provided them with a safe house there, and they were able to then start organizing. They did form Soweto and Tsietsi an organization called the South African Youth Revolutionary Council, which they brought to Botswana, closer to home. And there's some people there who are still alive, who were part of that organization, who can tell the story. Point is, they did not join the PAC, they did not join the ANC, because they were guided by the Black consciousness movement and ideology. And that's why they formed their own organization. But also they were very stubborn young people who wanted to lead the revolution. Thabo Mbeki has a story about how in London he tried to persuade Tsietsi Mashinini to join the ANC, but he failed because Tsietsi was like, no, you ANC people are not willing to fight. Anyway, what then subsequently happened is that Kgotso, when Zimbabwe was liberated, the Zimbabwean ZANU-PF in particular said to them, come bring soldiers, we'll give you our camps in Mozambique and some other frontline states. And Kgotso Seatlholo came to South Africa in a very brazen action. He was to address, he was banned, he was looked, the apartheid government wanted him. He infiltrated back to South Africa. The plan was that he will address a June 16 commemoration in Soweto. He will appear for 5 minutes. He will make a very clear short call. Come to out. We have an army. We have bases. We need you to come out in your thousands. Let us start the revolution. Because they were to occupy the bases that were left by ZANU-PF as ZANU-PF was going into government in Harare. Now, Kgotso's plan was intercepted. He was arrested. He was tortured. He was sent to Robben Island for 15 years. So as a consequence of that arrest, that big moment that they were hoping to ignite by bringing Kgotso into the country, very brazenly, going to Soweto, Regina Mundi, and appearing there on the anniversary of 76, and making a call to students to come out and young people to come out, because now they have the infrastructure to start an armed assault on apartheid. But the apartheid government intercepted that. Even Zwelakhe Sisulu, who Kgotso was in touch with, he was editor of a newspaper, I think it's called The World, and he was to cover that moment. But the telephone between him and Kgotso were intercepted by the system, and that is how Kgotso got arrested. And Zwelakhe was also arrested. He spent time in jail for attempting to assist that revolutionary moment, which the leadership of the Soweto students under the Black Consciousness movement wanted to reignite to make sure that revolution persists. However, structurally, the 76 moment gave a lot of impetus and life to the old liberation movements which were in exile. A lot of young people left the country at the time. They joined Umkhonto we Sizwe of the ANC. They joined the PAC, APLA. And for the first time, there was life imbued in this liberation movement armies. They had real people who were willing to fight, who were impatient to come to fight. In fact, they were so impatient that we know that some of them, the Umkhonto we Sizwe in Angola, arrested them, tortured them, killed some of them, because they undertook a mutiny saying that they were not prepared to die fighting UNITA. They wanted to come fight here at home. That's another story which must still be told. But the contribution of 1976 for our liberation is really, really big. When Steve Biko was asked, what is the biggest contribution of the Black Consciousness movement? He said, 1976 Soweto. Because indeed, I don't think the apartheid government could have been shaken to the level that it was if we didn't have the moment of 1976 uprising in Soweto. It's a moment that we must keep on going back to, but we must also, as you know, Disraeli, a German philosopher, said that history is contested, and if the enemy wins, even the dead will not be free, will not be safe. And we see the erosion of all these events which happened not under the ANC being eroded. Soweto Black Power Day is no longer called the June 16 Uprising Black Power Day, Soweto Day. It is called the Youth Day, innocuously. Just like Sharpeville Massacre Day, it's no longer Sharpeville Massacre Day. It is being called the Human Rights Day. So there's been an erasure, a lot of erasure of historical moments of resistance. Also, instead of the Black Power feast, defiant, representing the June 16 moment of Black Power, we're here to fight, very proud people, brave people. They have symbolized June 16 with the lame body of Hector Peterson being carried by Makubu. So it is a moment of our people injured at death throes as a consequence of the apartheid regime. Instead of showing the defiance that led to over 500 young people being murdered. You know, I always make the point that this country has always been rescued by young people. When the ANC was dating the 40s, it was the young people led by people like Sobukwe and others who revived the ANC through the ANC Youth League. Just like after the ANC was banned and the PAC was banned, when there was a lull, it was young people led by Steve Biko in the 70s who revived the revolutionary possibility, leading up to 1976. Now, I also make just the example of Ventersdorp, which is not far from where I grew up in Potchefstroom, where a white man, Eugene Tereblanche, was terrorizing that community. Black people very, very badly. He beat up people, he even killed people. Eugene Tereblanche was a terror, and it was two young black people who took him out and freed the people of Ventersdorp. So even now, the future is in the hands of young people. And that's why the system is frustrating them so much. That's why the system is making sure that they don't get organized and not get conscientized. And that is why there's been a whole quietification of young people and the 76 moment. The drugs that we see now are being unleashed on the black community. You must not just think of them as innocent money-making schemes, but they are part of demobilization of the youth. Because any system knows that the people who are going to give serious challenge to the system is young people. So young people are under attack, they are being demobilized, they're being turned into drunkards or all these subcultures which make them not to think about making a revolution. But young people in this country, many, many times, have rescued the revolutionary program and gave us hope. Again, we hope young people will rise to the occasion because the future belongs to young people. And the 1976 is a great moment of learning of how young people took on the apartheid government with just determination, love for black people, and bravery. There are many, many interesting events that happened around the 76. They even had a hit squad, which was petrol bombing police stations. They had it within that whole milieu of a student resistance. They were building a revolutionary force with real revolutionary possibilities. And there are big lessons that we can get from there. Students, as we know, can spark the revolution, but they cannot sustain it. They need black students, black worker solidarity to sustain that revolutionary process. And as I said, there are too many lessons from the 1976 moment which we need to learn from, including just how they managed to undermine the apartheid governments, trying to divide them by putting hostile dwellers who were from outside of Soweto to fight against the students. And the students understood that, and they went to the hostels, sat down with those hostile dwellers, and explained their project and win them over, which did not happen in the 80s and early 90s, when there was a black-on-black violence organized by the apartheid government, where hostile dwellers were mobilized against the Soweto or township residents. There was not that kind of thinking which drove the leadership of the Soweto students, who understood the divisions of black people and the need to have conversations to clarify what is happening and why we must be united. That is one other lesson. And of course, the Soweto students were very clear that no black person must be attacked. In conclusion, I'll just talk about the one unfortunate event which happened. Babu Credo Mutwa, after the 1976 uprising, the Boere set up a commission of inquiry. And in that commission of inquiry, to apparently see what the causes of Soweto, Babu Credo Mutwa went there and they promised him that it will be on camera. His testimony will not be made public. But young journalist, white liberal, Helen Zille, the leader of the DA, was a journalist at the time. And she actually got to hear about Babu Credo Mutwa's testimony. And she published that testimony. And Babu Credo Mutwa was mildly critical of the students and the fact that people were not going to work and all that. And the student got so angry that they actually went and attacked Babu Credo Mutwa, and they stabbed him many times, left him to death, by the way. And they burned down his house as a consequence of Helen Zille publishing a story that she shouldn't have published, the Boere having given Babu Credo Mutwa the assurance that his testimony will be kept a secret. So Babu Credo Mutwa was attacked by those students. He was stabbed multiple times and he was left for death. As a consequence of Helen Zille not respecting black people, not respecting black people's lives, and not respecting Babu Credo Mutwa himself. The black-on-black violence is always created by the white system to make sure that black people fight amongst themselves. What we have done with that Credo Mutwa story is that I spoke to the leaders of the June 16 movement who I know, like Opangwenya and others. And in fact, we did go to the Credo Mutwa family. They asked for a pardon. They slaughtered a beast there to appease the ancestors. We even went to the Credo Mutwa crawl and do some libations and some ceremonies to ask for forgiveness. So peace has been restored between the 1976 student leaders and Ubaba Credo Mutwa. But it was a violent moment generated by the white system to undermine the black solidarity. But we learn a lot from the June 16 generation. And as I say, the contestation about who's responsible for 1976 must be laid to rest. It was the Black Consciousness organizations led by students informed by the Black Consciousness philosophy, Tsietsi Mashinini, Khotso Seatlolo in particular. And we know that just like the Freedom Charter is for the ANC, Sharpeville Massacre is organized by the PAC, the 1976 moment must be credited to the Black Consciousness movement of Steve Biko. You know, Steve Biko and Abraham Tiro, another time I'll probably talk about them, just about their political activities and understanding of what it means to make a revolution. They have a very two distinct methods of organizing towards a revolution. We will discuss whose method was perhaps more effective. Yes, that's it for tonight. Izweletu.